Hello and welcome to this week's BioBite. This week we're going to talk about ecology, the biosphere, including biomes and weather and climate. So the first thing we're going to talk about are the biogeochemical cycles. These cycles form the basis of how the environment works and how essential nutrients move from living components to the non-living components and then back again. The first cycle is the water cycle. This is where water from the land and the oceans enters the atmosphere by either evaporation or sublimation. It then cools and condenses into clouds and then falls as rain or snow, depending on where it's falling. The precipitated water may then enter freshwater bodies such as lakes, rivers, or streams, or infiltrate the soil and sometimes become part of groundwater storage, such as aquifers. Then the cycle is completed when surface or groundwater re-enters the ocean through, say, the Mississippi River entering the Gulf of Mexico. The next piece is the carbon cycle. Carbon exists as two types of carbon, either carbon dioxide gas or organic carbon. Carbon dioxide gas exists in the atmosphere. It can be dissolved in water and then pulled down into oceans and streams and rivers as part of that. Or it can be taken up during photosynthesis and then converted into organic carbon. And then respiration cycles that organic carbon back into carbon dioxide gas. Long-term storage of organic carbon occurs when matter from living organisms is buried deep underground and becomes fossilized. So volcanic activity can bring that stored carbon back into the carbon cycle, and human emissions can also do so through the use of fossil fuels. The third cycle is the nitrogen cycle. Nitrogen gas exists in the atmosphere as N2. It enters the living world from the atmosphere via what we call nitrogen-fixing bacteria. These are the bacteria that are in legumes. They can be free-floating in the water, free-living in the soil. Then that fixed nitrogen becomes available to plants, which take it up, and then animals eat the plants. Then as things happen, plants die, animals poop, animals die. That releases the nitrogen back into the soil, and then it is processed back into gaseous nitrogen by soil bacteria, and that's how we go through the nitrogen cycle. Then we talk about the phosphorus cycle. In nature, phosphorus exists as phosphate. Weathering of rocks and volcanic activity releases phosphate into the soil, water, and the air, where it becomes available to terrestrial food webs. It enters oceans via surface runoff, groundwater flow, and river flow. Then phosphate dissolved in ocean water cycles into the marine food webs. Some phosphate from the marine food webs falls to the ocean floor where it forms sediment. Our problem that we have here is we put a lot of nitrogen and phosphorus into these two cycles through the use of fertilizers. And so what that can do a lot of times is cause overgrowth in lakes and waters and streams, and in the ocean, we call that eutrophication, where you get too much algae growing. And then when the algae runs out of food and begins to die off, it causes low oxygen conditions in that body of water, such as, the Gulf of Mexico dead zone or your local lake or your local pond. And then you get fish kill and damage to the aquatic organisms. The sulfur cycle, sulfur dioxide is in how it exists in the atmosphere. It becomes available to terrestrial and marine ecosystems when precipitation takes it down out of the air as weak sulfuric acid, or when it falls directly to the earth as fallout. The weathering of rocks also makes sulfates available to terrestrial ecosystems. Decomposition of living organisms return those sulfates to the ocean, soil, and atmosphere, and the cycle begins again. This is actually where we get acid rain. We release sulfur into the atmosphere as hydrogen sulfide, and then through burning fossil fuels. And then that hydrogen sulfide is dissolved out of the air and forms sulfuric acid in the rain. And that's how we get the problem of acid rain. When we talk about ecosystems and biomes and biogeochemical cycles, we have to talk about how those nutrients move within those ecosystems as well. Ocean upwelling is an important process that recycles nutrients and energy in the ocean. As the wind moves across the surface of the ocean, going out offshore, it causes the water from the ocean uh, top to move, and that movement causes the ocean water from the bottom to be pulled up, and that moves to the surface and brings up nutrients from the ocean depth, things that have settled. This also happens in lakes. It's called turnover. In the winter, the lake is fairly stable in temperature. You know, not a lot of variation all the way through. But then as spring happens, you get a turnover where the wind currents and different cold water from the upper side of the lake begins to sink. And then that pushes water from the bottom of the lake upwards. And then summer, you get what we call stratification, where the top of the lake is warm, and then it gets cooler as you go down. Then in the fall, what happens is that warm water starts to cool and push downwards, and becomes denser and pushes downwards and causes the water at the bottom of the lake to come upwards. Then you get another turnover. You'll notice this if you live anywhere that uses like Thunderbird for a water source, because it turns over pretty regularly spring and fall, and you'll get taste and odor issues and water quality issues with it. So that leads us into talking about ecosystems and biomes. So the world kind of acts the same way that our body does, as being organized from levels of small complexity to levels of large complexity. So as our body is organized, cells, tissues, organs, organ systems, and the body, ecosystems and the world around us are organized much the same way. So you have an organism. So in a forest, each pine tree is an individual organism. Then you have a population of pine trees. So all the pine trees together make up a population. Then you have a bunch of populations of different plant and animal species all together in an area, and that makes up a community. And then all of the communities in the area make up the ecosystem. So a coastal ecosystem includes all of the communities, which are made up of all of the populations and made up of all of the different organisms. And they are interacting with the environment in which they live. So the biotic components that we just talked about, but then the abiotic components like the soil and the water and the air, all interacting together makes an ecosystem. And then all of the ecosystems that are of the same type together make a biome. So, the tundra, the taiga, the Great Plains, that is its own biome. It is a temperate grassland biome. So all of those different ecosystems within that Great Plains make up that biome. And then all of the biomes together make up the biosphere, which encompasses all of the biomes and ecosystems on Earth. So an ecosystem is a community of living organisms and their interactions with their abiotic or non-living environment. Equilibrium is the steady state of an ecosystem where all organisms are in balance with their environment and with each other. Now, what this doesn't mean is that there's no fluctuation. If you look at ecosystems, naturally there is a small amount of fluctuation, but it corrects itself. It never goes too far one way or the other. It always comes back into a state of equilibrium. You have a good year for rabbits, so you have a lot of rabbits that are born. To bring that ecosystem back to equilibrium, you will also have a boom in the population of coyotes. The population of rabbits, through lack of food, predation, comes back down to a lower amount, and the population of coyotes will do the same. It basically cycles like that as it goes along. Then resistance is the ability of an ecosystem to remain at equilibrium in spite of disturbances. That's that fluctuation and its ability to come back to kind of the center. And then you have resilience, the speed at which an ecosystem recovers equilibrium after being disturbed. In each ecosystem, we have a sequence of uh, passage of nutrients from one level to the next. The very simplified way to look at it, if you're just looking at single species, is to look at a food chain. So in this case, our lowest trophic level is the green algae. That's our primary producer. Mollusks are our primary consumer. So they're the next level up. Then our secondary consumer is the slimy sculpin. And then our tertiary or apex consumer is the Chinook salmon. So that is just a basic food chain. So starting with whatever your plant is in the ecosystem and moving upwards together. So the food web is a graphical representation of what we call a holistic, non-linear web of primary producers, primary consumers, and higher level consumers. We use this to describe ecosystem structure and dynamics because you can get kind of an idea how things interact with each other. So energy acquisition. All of our ecosystems begin with a photoautotroph. That's basically saying plants, algae, photosynthetic bacteria, anything that makes its own food. These serve as the energy source for a majority of the world's ecosystems. We also have what we call chemoautotrophs that synthesize complex organic molecules for their own energy. And usually these happen in places without sunlight and use other sources of energy. So around hydrothermal vents in the ocean, things like that. And then the rest of your food chain or food web is going to heterotrophs, acquiring energy from digesting living or previously living organisms. When we say biomass, that is the total mass in the unit area at the time of measurement of living or previously living organisms within a trophic level. Primary productivity, the rate at which photosynthetic primary producers incorporate energy from the sun, and net primary productivity is the energy that remains in the primary producers after accounting for the organism's respiration and heat loss. That net productivity is then available to the primary consumers at the next trophic level. Now, each time you move up a level in the food web or trophic levels, you're going to lose some energy because all of the energy that the primary producers gained from the sun is not made available to the next level. And all of the energy that the secondary consumer or the primary consumer gets from eating the grass or the algae or whatever, not all of that is made available to the next level up. So the cow eats the grass. They don't get all the energy that's in the grass because the grass had to use some of it to live. We eat the cow. We don't get all of the energy that's in the cow because the cow had to use some of that energy to live. So as you're looking at it, you lose a little bit each time you go up the level. If we get eaten by a mountain lion, the mountain lion's not going to get all of the energy that's in us because we had to use some of that energy to live. We also have to talk about biomagnification or biological magnification. This is the increasing concentration of a persistent toxic substance in an organism at each trophic level, from the primary consumers to the apex consumers. The chart that we have here shows PCB levels found at the various trophic levels in the Saginaw Bay system of Lake Huron. The numbers on the x-axis reflect the enrichment with heavy isotopes of nitrogen, which is a marker for increasing trophic levels. The fish at the higher trophic levels accumulate more PCBs than the lower trophic levels because the phytoplankton gets some of it, then the zebra mussels eat lots of phytoplankton and get all of it from all of the PCB from all of the phytoplankton they ate. Then the amphipod eats the zebra mussels and gets all of the PCB that the zebra mussels have acquired. And then the white suckerfish eats the amphipods and the zebra mussels and gets all of the PCB that was acquired by both of them, increasing the concentration in that fish. The alewife then, and so it moves on up. Each time you increase the concentration because each higher trophic level is being exposed to more of it through their food system. This also happened with DDT and eagles. What was happening is that, we'd killed the insects with the DDT, the fish ate the insects, got the DDT from the insects, it built up in their tissues. The eagles ate the fish, it built up in their tissues, and the end result were paper thin eggshells, so that most of the eggs were not making it all the way to hatching and caused some pretty major problems. So this doesn't always kill the affected uh, organism. Sometimes it causes things like mutations, problems with reproduction, that sort of thing.